The topic of today, communicating with difficult people. In this series, current events in conflict resolution with Thomas G. Giglione. Hi everyone and welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast from instantmediations.com. It's where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Please remember, nothing contained in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so please talk to a lawyer as cases are fact-dependent.
Hi, I'm Mac Pierre, attorney mediator and arbitrator from Texas and Florida.
And I am Natalia Olowska Pierre, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator.
This is Thomas Giglione, and originally from Toronto, Canada, a mediator and arbitrator from Toronto, Canada, currently in Hanoi, Vietnam.
All right, so let's get started with today's topic. But remember, you can catch this discussion and past and future shows on the website, instantmediations.com, and on the Lawyers and Mediators International YouTube channel, and on the podcast. So be sure to stay connected. All right. Natalia, please lead the way.
Thank you so much. Communicating with difficult people might seem challenging, but also everybody feels that it is something that we are really facing in our everyday situations. It can be a neighbor, it can be someone on the public transport we go to every day. It can be happening to us anytime. And it leaves us with such an unpleasant feeling that maybe we did something wrong. Thomas, you are an expert in communication, and we would like to hear some general tips from you how to handle the situation of conversation with difficult people in everyday life first.
Well, thanks, Natalia, for the question. One of the things that I say to people when they ask me such a question is, I don't try to deal with difficult people. That sounds dismissal, like I'm dismissing it. But whenever we're faced with a decision, we have three decisions we can make with dealing with a difficult person. We could do what makes us look good. Right? We could do what makes us feel good, or we can do what is right, or what's best for both parties. And often we get into the trap of looking good, looking right, doing something that away from doing right and getting a win-win resolution, but and forgetting what is the outcome that you want. And we try to, the way I look at it is, what is the outcome that you want? You could, land an airplane, or you could crash an airplane. It's the way, the process of negotiating with the other person. What is the end result? You have to look at, if I win, what is the outcome? If I look good, is that winning? So you have to really strategize in your mind and focus on doing what's right rather than looking good.
So, Thomas, when we were discussing the topic, communications in general, we wanted to be more specific about difficult conversations, right? And so this is how we came to this idea of communicating with difficult people, quote unquote. And we keep putting that word difficult in quotations because, well, we all can be a little difficult, right? It's not like there's just one right person out there and everybody else is wrong. And so when you are dealing with other people as a mediator, I know as a mediator, you can sometimes get trapped, right? Or even be misled or be dragged and baited into an argument with someone who's condescending or challenging to talk to. How do you as a mediator deal with this? And then what are the tips you have for other people who are dealing with such an individual?
That's a good question. I'm sure you've probably been in a situation like this where you've been in an elevator and everybody's quiet and you're looking at somebody, and there's something about that person that you don't like. You know, they didn't do anything. There's just something about them. And that means there's something in you that is reflecting from that person. Or, you know, you shake somebody's hand at a party, and the way they look, the way they appear, or the way they dress, you actually categorize that person, and you create you have to look at your own behaviors and appreciating and have self-awareness for your own behaviors. So we get trapped and make mistakes into arguments, or even not in mediation, we get trapped. So we fall victim to what's called category error, a thinking that you pigeonhole these people. Oh, these are difficult people. Or there's another confirmation bias, to notice that interpret information that confirms with your ideas, your preconceived ideas. That traps you. And this creates a loop, a reflexive loop that occurs. For example, you think, oh, she's obstinate, so she does something that is obstinate, that reconfirms what you already think about them. So you get trapped in this thinking, in this loop that traps you from really seeing what is really there in front of you.
This is interesting. And is there any recent research in this area dealing with difficult people and strategies for changing people's minds?
Yes. Glad you asked that. There, I think in another previous podcast, I spoke to you both about one of my favorite websites is Reddit. Because Reddit is very much community-based, and Cornell University did a recent research on a community. It's called Change My View. It's a forum of internet. It's a community, and they did 2 years of research on this. And basically, it's a forum where there's topics like zoos are immoral. I believe this. Change my mind. Right. And you could see the comments that come up. So the forum requires that the person posting let others know if their view has changed by putting a delta sign and things like that. So this Cornell University study showed that several things that were quite interesting. The number of people that disagreed with that original post made an influence in changing the opinion of that person. The people that wrote the first commenters were the ones that tended to change the opinion of that person. Also the language between the arguments to persuade, the kinder, gentler, they use specific examples, or they added links to prove their examples. They used another thing they noticed when they scanned these comments, change my mind forum, they use definite articles, being more specific. And they use phrases like, for example, for instance, example, more often. And they found that person that used personal pronouns, I were more obstinate. As opposed to more plural pronouns. Mm-hmm. So it was a very interesting study. I have a copy of it. If I can share it later, if anybody is interested. So it's this is from a forum, a 2-year study, and there's posts on this every day. Change my view, change my mind, and you could post anything up there, something ridiculous. I saw some really terrible, opinions about things. Political views, are very interesting, and you can see sometimes there was one. I don't want to get into politics, one political view. This person is going to spend too much money. We're going to go into debt. And there was something like over 1,000 posts in 24 hours. So it's a very popular forum. And Cornell University, like I said, did a very extensive study on what changes people's views to get out of this echo chamber that we're all in social media.
So let me bring this to something a little closer to home.
Mm-hmm.
As you might know, I do a lot of family mediations, and I've discovered over time when you are, let's say you're caucusing and you have a couple, they're going through a very strenuous time in their relationship, they're about to separate, and each of them are in a different room, maybe with their lawyer. And as a mediator, you're going back and forth, learning about the topics, about the subjects, spotting the issues, and getting clarification on what are these folks really arguing about? Like, what is the center of their conflict? And I've discovered that when one person gives me an offer to take to the other side, it usually will end in a positive result versus a negative result if I take the offer over with a rationale, right? Because rationales help the opponent understand why you have a position. It's not just dictatorial. Okay, so when you were bringing up the change my mind and you reference people who would say I came across as being obstinate, whereas people who seem to take more of a humble approach towards trying to persuade others were more successful. I've absolutely experienced that. Okay, so I tell people all the time, hey, before you send me to the other room with your offer, they may reject it, but please give me your rationales. Help me understand why, this is to everyone's benefit. Okay, so then when I take it over there, it is more likely to be received in a softer, gentler way by the other side. So just something I wanted to throw out there, and that is that this is not just academic; it's actually down to the heart, and it touches the emotional levels and affects people every day.
That's a really good point. I wanted to talk a little bit about caucusing, if I may. I might have a different approach with caucusing. The way I deal with caucusing, caucusing is where you have the other parties in a private session with the mediator. I basically, I kind of instruct them to, I don't deal with so much with the going back and forth type of thing. I deal with I train them how to deal when the other person is communicating. So I do a little session, like, for example, if they propose something, I tell them, don't propose it, don't reject it right away. You might want to reject it, but don't reject it. You could say, that's interesting. You could say, have them say, let me think about that. It could be the worst proposal ever, right? But have them not, automatically reject, and getting back into that kind of counter offer type of scenario. Because when you train the other people to tame down and lower the heat a bit, and I do this with both sides, and I say, don't reject the other side. If you want to reject it, just say, listen, I need to think about it. And then maybe in a future session, they could come back and they could give reasons why they don't agree with that particular point. And then that's their window of opportunity to give their counter proposal. Because if you're rejecting back and forth, you're going to be going through many steps in the mediation. So I deal with the caucus as kind of educating them and how to behave in the mediation, especially in family law. My God, that's an area that that to me is uncontrollable. I've been co-mediating in family mediation. That's why I don't do family mediation. I really admire you, Natalia, and Mac for the perseverance and the patience in that, because sometimes it's illogical. And I'm more of a logical person. But even though I'm a logical person and I like using evidence and that, I'm also touchy-feely and get them to number one, to be kind. Remind them to be kind, because if you're in a session and they were not kind, you got to remind them that not being kind is actually detrimental to the final outcome. And the other thing is, I get them to picture, what do you see this end result? What do you honestly see? A lot of them say, we see court, we see, litigation, we see a custody dispute. And then in the caucus, we say, is that what you want? Is that the picture that you want? And remind them of that picture, and often the picture on both sides in the caucus is exactly the same. Is exactly the same in the end. So I remind them in caucus not to reject. Let me deal with that. Be patient, be kind, and understand where their anger is coming from. Like for me, when I sit down in caucus, like, why are you angry? What is the reason? And and I mentioned before in a previous podcast that it's a loss of control. Anger is just a false sense of control. It's just it's what's worked before. But it really, when anger is involved in everyday lives, it's actually a feeling of your loss of control. And as human beings, when we lose control, we lose our freedom. We feel that we're dependent on other people's actions, and when in fact we're not. We're very independent. So it's sometimes lack of self-awareness, lack of dealing with the anger issues and understanding the anger issues. So for me, I work on trying to tame the two parties and just work with the reality.
Thank you so much for all that. So these are actually very practical methods you can handle it. And you named reminding people of being kind, reminding people of not acting on their emotions first, but saying that we need to think about it deeper. So giving also yourself some time to think. So these are some of, and visualization, as you said. So thinking about the future, where all of it brings us. And these are very good methods. I also use them, and thank you for bringing them up. And what does science say about it all? How about the use of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, in mediation? Do you have any view on that? A lot has been written about NLP, and I know that some mediators use it in their practice. What is your view on it?
I first heard or went to a conference in Thailand strictly for NLP and using in negotiations. And I walked out of the conference early feeling that it's a pseudoscience. And I would say there's about 90% of it I cannot accept, but there is some truth to it. There is some truth on the semantics that you use, the language that you use. But I think it's overzealous, and it's almost gone into a pseudoscience cult, a way of being that I think can be very dangerous. So I'm not a big fan of it, but I am a fan of some techniques where language is used, using cohesive language, using, well, for example, for me, what's very powerful is, instead of asking the parties why are you doing this? Why do you want to? I think that's a pit that is going to really create a circular argument. But if you change the word to how, all of a sudden they have to come up with a mechanism. How is this going to be done? They could visualize it. But if you ask why they want this, if you could switch it to how is the mechanism going to work? How do you envision this? All of a sudden, you're doing two things. You're not judging, why do you want to do this? And they're defending themselves, but you're actually giving them the platform to say, what is the mechanism to make this work? And you're giving them the power, the self-respect to come up with their own solution. And often, they come up with their own solutions by just changing the semantics. And that is, to me, neuro-linguistic programming. I would say linguistic programming. You plant the seeds, make them change their perspective. So just that little thing, little tips like that, yes, we're taught as mediators, to reframe and all that, but I think there are more powerful methods that we can use in neuro-linguistic sense, in the language that we use to create, so people have more self-respect, and you give them the power to solve the problem. And, as they said, you cannot solve the problem with the same, you cannot solve the problems using the same methods that created the problem. You can't, you have to change the dynamics. You have to think out of the box. And that's why I think the best mediators are probably the most creative mediators, as opposed to the mediators that are very positional and, going back and forth with offer and counter offer. And to me, that's not mediation. And that's not going to get the best result for a win-win.
So when you speak about respect, you brought up the word respect a second ago, and I thought about the word dignity. That's one of the root things that all humans want, right? They want to be treated with respect and honor and dignity, and not have their ideas or their thought processes tossed to the side. So this happens in the workplace as well. So I know that you've been an ombudsman and you've mediated disputes where there's conflicts between coworkers or employees and supervisors. Can you give us some practical examples or tips to reduce workplace disputes with office bullies, or how to generally deal with difficult people in the workplace? Because there's something that we all have to deal with, right? We all have to go to work, and we all have challenges sometimes. So how do you, as a ombudsperson, what experience do you have in dealing with this?
Yeah. What I'm in Vietnam, and here, in the West, in the workplace, the Me Too movement had a significant impact on the workplace, and taming the workplace as far as misogyny and all the rest of it. But here in Asia, it's kind of old school, and it's like, things were, the Me Too movement is just starting to come here, and it's starting to take a hold. And now there's more awareness. So what I do in these situations, when I'm called in there, I have to get a cultural awareness. I'm in Vietnam, so it's a different realm. It's a different way of dealing with these situations. So I first have to apprise myself of what is the situation that's happening here. What are the dynamics? Because a lot of people are afraid to speak out, and so we do anonymous surveys. Even still, that's even difficult because there's a trust issue here in Vietnam. They don't trust anything. They believe that everybody's being watched and all the rest of it. So it gets very complicated. But I teach them very basic things. For example, if they're not getting along with a coworker, there are subliminal ways that you could, how do I say it? Influence the situation, especially for HR people. Like, for example, there is somebody you just don't get along. You don't know why, right? There's a technique. It's kind of neuro-linguistic. What you do is you think something, maybe you just don't like somebody, they're just bossy or whatever. Think about something about them that you like. Because everything is not, people are not black and white. Just think about something. Maybe they're a good mother, a good father, right? but they're maybe terrible at work, maybe terrible team player. But what I would do is I would plant to other people, not directly that person, but kind of go around. Wow, I love, the way she's such a good mother. She has, she really balances her work life. I love how she treats her children, and something that will go back. And all of a sudden, the other person will catch that, and all of a sudden those kinds of subliminal mechanisms will allow for some of the conflict to reduce somewhat. But there are little subtle techniques like that they can use, and I train HR people. How you could use these kinds of techniques. We do role plays and we play with it, and in fact, they end up taking it home and practicing on their husbands or wives. And they are effective.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, Thomas. I think that you actually touched on the very good point. Communicating is about communicating with everybody in our lives, and sometimes this communication can get difficult. And we, of course, simplify things by saying that we communicate with difficult people, but there are sometimes simply difficulties in communication. By what you shared with us, you helped us understand what the ground for that can be, and also how we can handle that for the future. And I would like to thank you for today, invite everybody for our next session next week with Thomas Giglione on this podcast series that can be both watched and listened to on Instant Mediations app and instantmediations.com website, where we strongly invite you to be with us and stay tuned in. Thank you for watching and listening. See you next time.
And I am sharing briefly Thomas's website, which is up on my screen. Now, this is, of course, those people who have tuned into the video. But if you're listening in on the podcast, you'll be able to go to mediation.vn, and it should give you all the information you need. And also the sister site, vietnamadr.com, in case you are out east and want more information. All right. Thank you so much,
Mac.
Thomas.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you.